All right, welcome back. I'd like to start with a review of Galtong's typology of violence and peace, and how we have three different types, with one being highly visible and the other two not being invisible, but being less visible. It's a little tougher to look for it, and you need to explicitly be looking for these to see them oftentimes. And so the highly visible one is direct violence or direct peace, and these are mostly intentional actions to harm or help others. Or they could be physical, but they could be mental, emotional, spiritual. Where the two less visible are structural. And structural are consequences of systems. So these could be legal binding systems, these could be uses of military, but they don't have to be. They could be something like the education system or systems for how we feed the world. And they don't have to be intentional. Often, in fact, they're unintended consequences of systems. And then finally, you have cultural violence, cultural peace, and this kind of drives the show. These are beliefs or norms in society that justify the other forms of violence or peace. Why is it that we're willing to accept this form of violence? Often there's cultural violence underneath it, guiding it. And so, as I've said a million times, all religions can be and have been used to justify violence, even the peaceful ones. And of course, the opposite is true, that all religions can and have been used to justify peace, even the ones that some may consider violent. But right now we're going to focus on violence. And so we're going to go to the Eastern Hemisphere, to a land known as Myanmar or Burma. And so I'm going to give you a quick overview of Buddhists in Myanmar. Many of you probably at least learned a little bit about this in your human geography class. And there's been long-standing bad blood with the Burmese and the Rohingya. And so the Burmese are a Buddhist majority and the Rohingya are the Muslim minority. In the early 80s, there was a military government that made it so much harder for Rohingyans to become full citizens, which just exacerbated the problem. You can see some of the structural violence in there, which is going to lead to more direct and cultural violence. And so there is a debate over whether or not this is considered a genocide. And I don't think we need to focus on like the black and white nature of this is a genocide or it's not. But I want to mention some of the atrocities committed against Rohingya at a pretty large scale. So we're talking large-scale rape, forced labor, restrictions of movement, meaning you might not be able to travel out of the country or to specific parts of the country, restrictions on who you can marry and who you could reproduce with or how often you could reproduce, and then prevention from access to medicine and food rations. And so we see direct violence, we see structural violence, and we want to study the cultural violence that is providing fuel for this. And so I don't want you to think it's just the secular Buddhists that are doing this. Even Buddhist monks have become really violent and have led this violence. And so Buddhist nationalists in Myanmar think that the Rohingya have been trying to turn their country into a Muslim country, trying to change their culture into a way that is foreign and unnatural, and according to these people, undesirable. So you may have heard echoes or rhymes of this in other situations around the world. And now I think it's important to say that they don't hate all Muslims. There are groups that they'll point at and say, like, see, these are the good Muslims. These are the Muslims assimilating, not trying to change the culture, which is a classic colonization technique to divide and conquer a people. And so you have these monks, not all the Buddhist monks in the countries, but you have this group of monks that have been really leading this narrative and the diffusion of it, the spread of it. And for a long time, the narrative has been that the Burmese need to protect this Buddhist culture from outside invaders, that they need to hold on to it and keep it special and keep it quote-unquote pure from these people who are trying to change it. But I also don't want us to forget about internal diversity. Of course, there are plenty of Buddhists working to build peace in the country, and we're going to see both the violent Buddhists and the peaceful Buddhists and people who are all in between. So go to Canvas and open Myanmar Buddhists. Now there's a paper copy that the substitute has, so I won't be able to hand it out, but feel free to get a paper copy from the substitute or download the worksheet in Notability. And there's going to be a lot of subtitles, so it's important you don't get distracted, and you're definitely going to want to make sure you have the subtitles turned on. If most of the class is at a point where you want one person to just kind of airplay it, and the whole class watches it at one time, I ain't mad at that. But because of the complexity of this and the amount of subtitles and people taking notes, you probably do want to watch this on your own. We have headphones at the side of the room if you need to borrow them. And that way you can pause it, rewind it whenever you need to. And what you're going to do is you're going to take notes on different Buddhist perspectives offered in the video. For example, what are the names or types of monks that have been going against it? Are there any certain groups? Are there Buddhist lay people who are like a general practitioner who's not a monk versus monks? And just keep track of the different ones you're hearing from in the video. And then in addition to doing that, you're going to want to keep track of moments of violence and moments of peace you see, just as more practice to understand Galtung's typology and how it can illuminate conflict in this world. And then when you're finished with this, I have one more optional video for people who are more interested in understanding some of the theology that can be seen as cultural violence.